So the Russians appear to be throwing everything they can at a last-ditch effort to take control of Ukraine. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So why have I made such a big deal out of the war in Ukraine? Well, fundamentally, it's because I believe in justice, and I think that this is a deeply unjust war that was forced upon a country, really, that was minding its own business by a neighboring bully. And I've heard the criticism from some that, hey, this is just like when the United States invaded Iraq, for example. But guess what? I was opposed to the United States invading Iraq. I'm not a big believer in bullying, whether it be on a small-scale basis or on a global basis. And this is certainly an example of bullying. What's more, though, is it seems like the MAGA Republicans in particular, under the leadership of Donald Trump, of course, have made supporting Vladimir Putin almost a central policy position that they support, which seems really kind of odd, but hey, I've never understood that since the first time when he started talking about Vladimir Putin back in 2016. But if anything is clear by now, it's that Vladimir Putin is a deeply negative force in global politics. And I hope deeply that the Ukrainians are able to kick him out of their country, and I fully support the efforts of President Biden, and for that matter of the Republicans who've been supportive, including Mitch McConnell, to try to supply the Ukrainians with whatever they need to force the Russians out of their territory. For a while now, since the beginning of the war, I've actually been following the video vlog of Denis Davydov. He's a Ukrainian pilot who isn't right by the front lines, but has been really monitoring the situation very closely and giving periodic updates on the battle. I'll post a link to his channel down below. But he and a number of other commentators supporting the Ukrainian side have taken kind of, a little bit of a pessimistic tone to their commentary over the past few days. That commentary appears to be based on the fact that the Russians have really given up on everything in the war except for one thing, and that's pushing forward in the Donbass region in the east. Let's take a look at this map here that I'll also post a link to that shows exactly the status of everything that's going on. All right, so here is the what's called the deep state map, and it shows exactly what's going on in Ukraine. Of course, up here, you can see where the Ukrainians basically succeeded in their battle to force the Russians out of the northern areas of Ukraine, heading toward Kyiv, and of course you've got Chernobyl up here. So these are all the areas where you see the green, where basically the Russian forces had come in and they were forced out by the Ukrainians. So this was a major battle that the Ukrainians have clearly won. What's more is you can look over here. Well, let's just kind of move up here, okay? And you can see right over here is where the Ukrainians were successful in forcing the Russians back from Kharkiv, which is this area up here. And they've actually been so successful that they've basically forced the Russians back all the way to the Russian border. And they're within striking distance of the Russian city of Belgorod, which you can see up here. It's got multiple roads coming out of it, so it's an important supply point for the Russians in their war. Now you can see where there's this one road that comes out of Belgorod that basically has been cut off by the Ukrainian counteroffensive there. And clearly what the goal is that they hope to continue to push forward and essentially get in the way of other roads that the Ukrainians might be using to supply, that the Russians might be using to try to supply their forces down here. So you can see over here that they'll be continuing to push forward. But frankly, they've hit some pretty tough resistance where the Russians, as a result of this loss, have basically dug in and have been trying to hold the line here. The Ukrainians up here have advanced all the way to the river. It's going to be tough to cross that. And then over here, again, they're facing some Russians who are deeply dug in. So hopefully they'll be able to make progress. My guess is that they'll continue pushing down in this direction. They've got some roads that they can follow that will help them get close to Izium. Another area down here where they've been successful in pushing back Russian forces. You can see over here where they've been successful in pushing back Russians. And Izium was kind of the launching point for where the Russians, or one of the launching points for where the Russians were going to try to essentially create a salient where they'd be able to cut off the Ukrainian forces that are located in the Donbass region. Now, that offensive, that plan by the Russians, started where they were going to try to cut off here from Izium all the way south to probably over here, Vuhledar, I think it's called. I hope I pronounced these things correctly. I'm doing the best I can, not being Ukrainian. I've tried to listen to the different Ukrainian commentators to get a sense of how to pronounce some of these names, but I'm hampered by it. So initially, they had sought to cut off the Ukrainian forces here. Then it appeared that they had moved in and were trying to cut them off over here, where this M03 road goes. Finally, now it appears that the Russians have completely reduced their territorial aims, and really they're just aiming here on this little gap here, with the key city in the area being Severodonetsk. Now, this is a dangerous situation right now. The area between the Russian forces here really only amounts to about 20 kilometers, or you're talking about 12 miles. So you're talking a small area that they need to close. And their goal is to essentially close off the Ukrainian troops who've been fighting in here. Now, the two major cities here, Severodonetsk, which is closest to the Russian lines here, and Lysychansk are really the targets, with Severodonetsk being the one that's closest. And in fact, at this point, it appears that the Russians may have actually moved into some areas that include the Ukrainian airport down here, the Severodonetsk airport down here. And you can see where there is this part of the airport that has been covered over with the by the Russian forces. Now, the big issue today is that, let me find the date here again, is that if you go back a couple days, you can see that the Russians have been slowly moving up in this direction from the south here. And you can see that they made some progress here over the last couple days. And then all of a sudden today, they actually were able to push out their salient past this road over here, which is a major road coming up from Bakhmut. But now that Bakhmut, you can see they've got a lot of roads coming in and out of there. Bakhmut is a major supply point that's very important to the Ukrainians. So the fact that the Russians have been trying to cut off the roads here between Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and Bakhmut is not terribly surprising, especially given the fact that if the Ukrainians end up having to retreat, they will have to follow that road. Or I think that there's another road over here that also ultimately will get them down to Bakhmut. But the Russians are cutting off the Ukrainian possibilities for retreat, as well as also for resupply there. Now, you can see that since then, the Russians actually got pushed back a little bit, and the Ukrainians are pushing back on them to push them back from this road. Part of the problem with this area, though, is that you're dealing with plains. There's really nothing in the way. There are no towns. There's nothing there to really get in the way of the Russian advance. So the Russians have kind of been able to push forward really without anything standing in their way. Now, they're going to run up against certain things that are going to be problems, including some forests over here, a couple other towns over here, where the Ukrainians will be better off at defending themselves. There's also some water features here, which make it more difficult for the Russians to advance. But the point being that this has been an area where the Russians have been advancing, and it's really made a lot of the Ukrainian commentators very pessimistic. And if you look at Severodonetsk again, especially, I mean, it is surrounded at this point on three sides. And the Russians have been shelling into Severodonetsk, as is typical for their strategies. And they have really put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians in that area. Now, there is a question for the Ukrainians at this point as to whether it would make sense for them to continue to defend Severodonetsk or to move backwards across the water here to Lysychansk, where then you've got this water feature here, this river that's going to stand in the way of the Russians crossing over. And Lysychansk also is a little bit on high ground, which is going to then be something useful for the Ukrainians as they get more artillery to be able to fire in there. But again, if the Russians are able to close this gap here, then that's going to be a big problem for the Ukrainians. So there's going to be a lot of fighting going on here, and this is really going to be the battle that determines this war going forward, I think. And the reason for it, again, is if you look at the overall map here, up here, the Russians were unsuccessful around Kyiv. Up here, the Russians were unsuccessful around Kharkiv and literally have been pushed back up to their border. Down here, they have been stopped dead in their advance on the coast, and in fact, you can see over here that they've actually been pushed back. It's going to be very difficult for them to get any further than this because, of course, you've got a river here that stands in their way. They'd love to make it to Odessa, and of course, we've heard about the Russian blockade that is stopping ships from coming in and out of Ukraine there. But in terms of their land invasion, it's pretty weak over this area. And you can see with the green where the Ukrainians have been able to take back bits and pieces of this territory here. Way over here, by the way, is Mariupol. That's where the Ukrainians basically mounted a fierce defense, stopping the Russians from taking that once and for all at the steel plant, the Azovstal steel plant, right in the middle of Mariupol, until just a few days ago. So, right now, the Russians are being stymied in the south. They've basically been stopped in the south and are being pushed back. They've been stopped in the north and have been pushed back all the way to the Russian border. They've been stopped over here around Kyiv, and really, that was a strategic defeat that they endured over there. So, the really, at this point, and you can see with all of these arrows showing the direction of their offensive, they're almost entirely focused right now on this Donetsk region surrounding Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. Now, the point of all this is that this is the last gasp of the Russians. Every day that goes forward, the Russians are losing forces, they're losing material, and it's getting harder and harder for them to continue this advance. They do not have the forces, and they've pretty much determined that at this point, to be able to invade in the north. They've been pushed back in the south, and really at this point have just taken a defensive posture there. And around Kharkiv, and in the south, they're pretty much stalemated and actually have experienced some pushback there. So they really don't have the forces at this point to do anything except hopefully, as far as they're concerned, cut off this small section here, which contains a good portion of Ukrainian defensive positions. So that is the concern that the Ukrainian supporters have. Are the Russians, by launching everything they have at this one part of the line, going to be able to ultimately take back this piece of Ukraine? Or take this part of Ukraine, not take back. The point of all this is that the Russians at this point have pretty much reduced their goals to nothing more than taking these small territories here in the Donbass. And they're throwing everything they can at it in the hopes that they can take that section before the Ukrainians continue to get even more of the Lend-Lease supplies from the United States and our allies, and of the $40 billion that was just passed by the Congress and signed by the president, of more military equipment to send them, as well as all the military equipment that's being sent by our allies. And the Russians believe that they're in a race of time right now, where the Ukrainians also still have a lot of people that they're going to be able to recruit into their military, because this is an existential threat for them. In fact, word is that the Ukrainians are working on fielding a military, at this point, of 1 million soldiers. 1 million soldiers. That's very significant, and substantially more than the Russians would be able to field without engaging in conscription, that's what Vladimir Putin is trying to avoid. Because once conscription gets engaged, of course, then you start to get into issues with people rebelling against the war. That's, of course, what happened when we had it happen in Vietnam. So Vladimir Putin and his forces basically are desperate to try to take this final piece of the Donbass and to try to cut off the Ukrainians here, and they're putting everything they can into this effort in a last-ditch effort to succeed there, with the knowledge that if this fails, this will be their last gasp. And the Ukrainians are only going to continue to get stronger as they have more forces and more weapons, and as the Russians, trying to avoid any kind of conscription, and have already suffered more than a third of their troops being lost as a result of casualties, are going to be having fewer and fewer troops, and that their equipment is running out as a result of the various economic sanctions that they're facing from around the world. They are going to be at a disadvantage in a long-term war here. And so they're hoping to make some quick progress here and to be able to position themselves to be able to hold on, because over time, the Ukrainians are only going to get stronger and they're only going to get weaker. So what happens here then, in this salient right here, is really going to be the determinant of how this war proceeds. Are the Ukrainians going to be able to hold them off? And if so, I think that we can expect that this will be the last gasp of the Russians, and we're going to start to see more and more of the Russians falling back as they're unable to hold off against the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Well, that gives you a quick rundown as to how I'm looking at the war right now. We'll see what happens over the next couple days. It's going to be a big moment to determine who is successful here on the ground in the Donbass. And frankly, if the Ukrainians are able to, well, I think that it's the end of the road for the Russians. So let's keep our fingers crossed on that one. Well, if you want to see more of my reporting on what's going on in Ukraine, why don't you check out this video over here where I talk about how Vladimir Putin has been lying to the Russian people to try to keep them supportive of his military operation, his special military operation, as he calls it. Because, in fact, they've made it illegal to call this a war in their desperate effort to keep control of any potential opposition to this war. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.